Why is she staring at me so intently? Like she stares at me like, I love you. I can't breathe without you, or I'm plotting your fucking murder. Come here, mommy. Come on. Good girl. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Sounds beautiful.
Okay. I thought that I was in love with this man, but I wasn't. I was not faithful in this relationship. A fantasy would be, I guess, a menage, me and you. Why would I want to date such a weak bitch? I was almost raped. I was addicted to him. I am 48, child free, and I've never been married. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. Thank you so much for joining me. Whether you are commuting to or from work, or you've already gotten home and you are chilling with a glass of wine, or you're settling into your nighttime routine, I want you guys to just settle in and chill out with me because we're gonna have a heart to heart like we've never had before. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to pour myself a glass of wine. This is the good stuff. Now, consider this episode a safe space. I really want to have a heart to heart about certain lifestyle choices that I've made. We've all seen the most recent political climate as it relates to the election. And it seems like women, we always seem to be the brunt of some kind of attack. And I don't really understand why. But when JD Vance said this,
Saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
at first I was offended. And then when I thought about it, I really just had to laugh because never been married, childless cat ladies. Honestly, that sounds like a dream come true to me. I don't know. Like solitude, my own choices, and animals that love me. Oh my God, somebody, call the cops. This sounds awful. But, anyways, I know that I'm not the only one that felt that their life choices were put under attack. So this episode is called I Am 48, I Am Child Free, and I've never been married. And guess what? That's okay. I never made it down the aisle, but I have been engaged in the past. How many engagements? I would say 2.5. Let's start with the 0.5 since that was the first one. I was involved with a man who loved me. He was good looking, he was tall, he was charismatic, gregarious. Everybody loved him. My mom loved him, my sister loved him, my niece loved him, my friends loved him. Everybody loved him. But there was something inside of me that just said, this is not perfect. It's the furthest thing from perfect. He would say things like, nobody's ever going to love you the way that I love you. And I believed him. I wrestled with this internal sense of guilt. I wrestled with the guilt of honestly wanting to be free, honestly wanting to live my life and to date and to experience other men and to experience other things and other places. I just wanted to live my life. I had moved to New York from Toronto, a totally different country, with $25, 2 suitcases, and a one-way ticket. I didn't have permission from my country to leave. I didn't have permission from this country to be here. And I was making things happen for myself at a very, very rapid pace. And so to find myself inside of a relationship that felt so stifling at this very young age and not having the vocabulary to speak up for myself and articulate that somebody who loves you would not say those things to you. They wouldn't say, that nobody will ever love you the way that I love you, because that indicates that there's a part of me that's broken or there's a part of me that's unlovable. But I didn't know how to articulate this. So I stayed in this relationship that I was wildly unhappy in for approximately 3.5 years, close to four. And I have to admit, I was not faithful in this relationship. Nothing that I'm proud of, but I just chalk that up to I was really, really young and I was hood famous. I was on the covers of magazines, on your local newsstand. So everybody recognized me. And that was another source of pressure that I felt being inside of this relationship rather than being free to explore all of my options. And so one day I was going through some drawers, folding laundry, placing clothes, in the drawers and such. And I found it. I found a box. And when I saw it, I said, please, God, don't let this be what I think it is. And I opened the box. And there it was. It was a ring. And the only thing that I could think was that it was an engagement ring. It sure as hell was not a promise ring. We were way beyond that. We were not in high school. I was not wearing this boy's varsity jacket. This was an engagement ring. And if I knew this man the way that I knew him, that proposal was going to be very public. And that terrified me. I didn't want to have to say no in front of our friends and family and publicly humiliate him. He did not deserve that, but I also could not see myself saying yes in front of everybody just to save face, and then later on have to break it to him like that this is not something that I was going to be able to go forward with. So what I did instead was I packed up all my belongings while he was out of town and put them in storage and flew back to Canada. And then I had the conversation about us breaking up over the phone. I know what you're probably thinking as well. Yo, Melyssa, that's fucked up. I know. It took years for me to make peace with this decision. I have self-flagellated over this decision. I have beaten myself up every way to Sunday that you possibly can. I tried to reconcile with him at one point, which was a big mistake. That is the 0.5.
I had an ugly duckling phase. Shh, don't tell anybody. I destroyed all the pictures, so there's no proof. Before I became a video model and a model, and I was like known as the brain amongst all my friends. So I was studying forensic psychology with a minor in English literature in university. So the fact that I started to become known more for my looks than my brain is kind of ironic. The attention just snowballed, and I started to see that I was able to, make a business out of it. If it didn't make money, it didn't make sense.
Society places an enormous amount of pressure on us to check certain boxes. The box of go to school and excel. You've got to pursue a career based on what you went to school for. And you've got to excel and become successful. And you have to have your 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year plan, all while you're in your 20s. Get married, get the white picket fence, and have 2.3 kids. Never figured out the point situation when it came to the statistics, because what's a third of a kid? But I digress on that. The problem with the boxes is that we never check in with ourselves. It is never, ever, ever our first thought as to, well, what is it that I actually want? I am now, welcoming into my circle a lot of women who checked all those boxes. And for all intents and purposes, a lot of the stuff really actually did not work out. Yes, they ended up with the children, but they ended up in sometimes a loveless, sometimes an abusive, and sometimes a marriage of convenience. Sometimes they didn't even get the marriage, they just got the kids, and they inherited a whole lot of struggle and strife. And it's not to say that their choices are better or worse than the choices that I made. These are just choices. But for us women, I feel like our choices oftentimes have never really, really belonged to us. And when we have tried to exert our sense of independence, we are shamed for it. At this point, let me go on to the second engagement. So I'm 28 years old and I have left the previous relationship, the point five, and I have met this man who, the minute I saw him, I knew I was going to be with him. He just was it. I don't know how to describe it. And the second I heard his voice, I said, I'm going to marry this man. I don't know what it was. Like, he had this Louisiana drawl. It's my favorite Southern accent. He was huge, like 6'1", 246 pounds of hulking muscle. He had skin the color of like red clay. He had this thick neck, big round head. He had this crooked tooth that drove me wild. His flaws were like manna from heaven for me. And I loved his dirty draws, and I could just sleep in his armpit right after he'd played a game of like pickup basketball. That is how much I loved this man. And our courtship was a whirlwind. He wined and dined me. He bought me lovely, lovely gifts. I'd wake up to those baby blue Tiffany boxes just laid on the pillow right next to me. We could go to my favorite store, and as long as I put on a little fashion show for him, everything I wanted I could get. But when I say that the gifts really mattered nothing to me, it was this man. He was the gift to me. That's just the fact. And we were 6 months into our relationship when the first sign of trouble appeared. I was in Denver for All-Star Weekend, and I was working for BET at the time. So I had a lot of responsibilities. I had to make a lot of appearances. I had to interview a lot of people, and a lot of those people were athletes. And he was back home. And I did not know that he was jealous. It didn't even cross my mind. And so when I got home after an event and I was perturbed by, an interaction with a strange man at a party that I had been at, he'd said something vile to me and it hurt my feelings. And all I wanted was to be comforted. And so I went back to my hotel room and I called my boyfriend and I just asked him to just tell me that he thought that I was beautiful and that he loved me. And he didn't do that. He just pressured me to tell him what happened. Why are you asking me to do this? And so I told him what happened, and he responded by saying, why would I want to date such a weak bitch that would be that offended by what some strange guy has to say to her? There's just no way that he just said that to me. I'm sorry, what? And he said, you heard me. And I said, I'm really confused right now. And he was like, I'm sure you are. I felt like I was talking to a stranger. There's no way that this was the person that I had just spent the last 6 months with, completely absorbed with, and in the throes of like love and ecstasy with. And I said, you know, I'm glad that I'm finding out who you really actually are now rather than later. He said, yeah, I'm sure you are. Click. And hung up the phone on me. I cried myself to sleep that night. And the next day, I had to cover a ladies' luncheon, the wives of the NBA. And so I had to be perfect and pretty. And I had to act like the man of my dreams had not just told me to basically go F myself. And so while I was getting ready, a large bouquet of flowers was delivered. My makeup artist said, Mel, you should read the card. And it said, you're beautiful to me and I love you. And I'm sorry. And then his name. I burst into tears. It just flew out of my face. So basically, my whole beat face just melted. And I called him and I said, I received your flowers. And he said, I am so sorry. And I told him, I'm going to forgive you because I love you. But you can't ever speak to me like that ever again. He's like, I promise I won't. So whenever people wonder, how do people end up in abusive relationships and why do you stay? The reasons are aplenty, but I will start by saying that that is not the way that it begins. It begins with love bombing. It begins with flowers, candy, gifts, and the wonderful sex and the cuddles and the pillow talk. And this is how it begins. And it can last for a lengthy amount of time before that person really shows up. The true version of themselves shows up. And by that point, you start to bargain with yourself and they start to apologize. And their apologies are usually very, very sincere because at the end of the day, I truly believe that they believe their apologies are real. They just have an illness inside of them. And I would also venture to say that the first signs of abuse are usually not physical. And by the time it gets to physicality, you start to reason that you were an active participant in it. You start to reason with yourself that you started the fight by angering him or saying something that was out of pocket. Or you reason with yourself that you are no shrinking violet. So it's not like you got hit and cowered in a corner. You fought back. These are the things that you reason and bargain with yourself that allow you to stay in this level of toxic relationship. And so, as much as I would love to say that that was the last time that he spoke to me in that way, and that was the last time that I received it, that would not be the truth. We were together for another year and a half, and I accepted his marriage proposal. And a lot of you would probably be asking, why would you do that? Why would you accept the marriage proposal of this man that was so abusive towards you and unfaithful towards you and really bad at it? Like, I found out everything all the time, and I don't really have an excuse for it other than I was addicted to him. Was working at BET at the time when we were dating, and more than once observations were made about bruises on my body and how skinny I was getting, obviously from the stress. And people had voiced concern for me, but I just shooed them away. We tussle. It's fine. No problem. But there really was a reason for concern. I stayed through it all and accepted the marriage proposal. The final straw for me was his reaction to finding out that my mom was ill. I had gotten a phone call while I was out with him and his family, and he was acting up as per usual. And I got a phone call from my aunt telling me that my mom had been rushed to the hospital. I was in Texas. So, in order for me to rush home to see my mom, I would have to leave Texas, go home to New York, pick up my passport, and then go to Canada. And when I told him what was going on, obviously I was looking for empathy and sympathy and compassion, and that was not what I got. It was on this day that I finally could see the forest for the trees. If I stayed in this relationship, in 10 years, I would have that white picket fence, and I would have the 2 kids, and I would be an abused woman, hiding her bruises and her broken bones and her scars from her family and her friends and society at large, because I was a forward facing media personality / model. My mom's sickness was, strangely enough, a blessing in disguise. And that relationship came to an end. And that was the first full engagement. So 1.5. So that's where we are right now.
Any advice for any beautiful women out there to try and make it? Any advice you have to give? Because I know it's a hard struggle.
Understand that there's no shortcuts and there's a lot of sacrifices involved in this game that nobody will ever tell you. You're asking for a lot when you want to become, as visible as, some people on this carpet or for that. Yeah, exactly. The right way. It's just be careful. Be careful what you wish for.
When I was 20 years old, I had this boyfriend. His name was Tony Smith. I can say his name because, you could throw a rock and hit a Tony Smith. It may as well be like John Doe. He was from Greensboro, North Carolina. And he had come up to Toronto to play for the Toronto Argos, which is a football team in the Canadian Football League. And he had played in the National Football League, the NFL, for many years. And a lot of NFL players, when they're not ready to hang up their cleats, and not ready to kind of be put out to pasture, they'll come to the CFL. And so I met Tony at this festival called Caravana in Toronto. He was so beautiful. My God, instant attraction, obviously. And we started dating. We genuinely liked each other. We liked each other to the point where we could say really, really offhand things to each other. For example, he asked me what my fantasy was. And I got this look on my face. And I said, well, a fantasy would be, I guess, a menage with me and you and somebody else. And he was like, another woman? I said, no, with another guy. And he was like, really? He was like, do you have an idea as to who this guy is? I said, yeah. He's like, really? You have to tell me. I said, it's your best friend. And I expected him to maybe slap me, I don't know what. But he threw his head back and roared with laughter. And I was like, wow, that was not the response I was expecting. And he said, do you want me to make that happen? I was like, oh my God, that is so sweet. No, absolutely not. It is just a fantasy. It is meant to stay there. But just the fact that you are open to it and don't make me feel shame for feeling this way. He was like, why would I make you feel that way? And Tony, I don't know. He maybe he was just an anomaly, but wherever we would go, no matter how scantily I was dressed, he would let me move around the party as I felt the need to and interact with anybody. And he would just sit there and just watch me with a smile. At one point, somebody stood next to him and asked him, like, Yo, aren't you afraid to let her walk around like that? And he was like, absolutely not. She's going home with me. I don't have anything to be worried about. And you want to know something? He was absolutely right. His level of confidence and knowing that I had eyes for nobody but him was what made him so much more sexy to me, so much more attractive, and made me like and love him so much more. I wish that I could say that the vast majority of my relationships went like this, but they didn't. They didn't. I'm going to take a sip of wine. I was raised as an only child. My father was a Rolling Stone, and I am the youngest of 11. But I am my mother's only child, and I was raised in a two-parent household, just me on my own. I used to wish constantly for a brother and a sister or a twin. It was around 6 when I figured out the twin thing was not going to happen. But I really wanted a brother or a sister because I was lonely. And I was smack in the middle of a very tumultuous marriage. Some of my earliest memories as a child are of my parents arguing and physically fighting each other. At one point, I was 5 and I got in the middle of my parents physically fighting each other. My mom was holding a glass pitcher above her head and was prepared to smash it on my dad's head. And I want to say that this was in defense of herself. This was her protecting herself. So, needless to say, my first introduction to marriage and how men and women, the expectation of how they interact with each other on a romantic level was very, 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 very traumatizing. And they didn't do anything to try to correct it. They didn't sit me down and explain things to me or apologize to me. I think that that's something that parents really miss the mark on a lot of the time, is that you are not perfect. You are human. And to be a human being is to err. And sometimes you do things to unintentionally harm your children or traumatize them, and they deserve an explanation and they deserve an apology. When my parents were not arguing with each other, they were staying as far away from each other as possible. And what that meant was I was left home alone a lot. So, one of the main reasons why my parents never said no to me when I wanted another animal. I had nothing but cats and dogs and birds and fish all over the house. I feel like animals saved me. It sounds strange, like I'm like, Mowgli or something from the what was that? What's that book called? The Jungle Book? Yeah, I'm Mowgli from the Jungle Book. But yeah, that was my reality. My parents would come home late at night. The animals were the ones that took care of me. Thankfully, I didn't burn down the house. But this left an imprint on my brain as to the way that men and women interact with each other. And it left me with a very serious internalized distrust of men. I think that this is where I developed the disconnect of wanting to create progeny. I just did not feel that urge like other women have to have children. And it is definitely intertwined with what I witnessed from a very early age as to my parents and their dysfunction. I ended up getting an IUD implanted in my uterus. And when I say that sucker was Fort Knox, nothing was getting through that mofo. And it stayed in so long that it ultimately made the decision for me. But yet again, it's not like I felt any source of pressure. Which leads me to the last engagement. When I was approximately 36, 37 years old. And I'll be honest, I thought that I was in love with this man, but I wasn't. What I was traumatized from an experience that had happened to me on a cruise ship where I was almost raped. And I could not be in the room alone with my own shadow. I was so traumatized by what had happened to me that when this man appeared, he was offering safety and security. He was physically huge, but he also came with a very secure lifestyle and a lot of security. And so I felt safe. And that's the only thing I was looking for. I was looking for safety. And so I lied to myself. And it was very easy to do that, to just dive in head first, forget the rocks below. And during the process of this relationship, I started to realize that I was losing myself completely and totally. Friends had started to notice, Mel, you're paying a lot of attention to his career, but what are you doing about yours? And I didn't want to hear it. I actually did not want to even hear my own name. I didn't know what it meant to be Melyssa Ford anymore. I had no clue. The sound of my own name gave me goosebumps, and not in the best way. I was having a massive identity crisis. And so when he proposed, he didn't even get the full words out before I said yes, because I was running from myself. I was running from my truth. I was running from the healing journey that was on the horizon. I was running, and I was trying to put the blinders on. But there was always that internal sense of that steel core of resilience and tenacity inside of me that said, Melyssa, this is not your truth. This is not your path. This is not it. And as scary as it was to keep trying to align myself with my internal compass, obviously, you make all these decisions, but it's got to bring you back pointing due north, which leads me to where I am now, 48, child-free, and never been married. And honestly, with zero regrets.
Did you ever decide to freeze your eggs?
Yeah, the freezing eggs conversation came up around mid-30s amongst myself and my girlfriends. It became something that just was a very trendy conversation to have. But if you know anything about freezing eggs, first of all, it's extraordinarily cost prohibitive. I was in the entertainment industry, and this is the way the entertainment industry goes. Feast, famine, feast, famine, feast, famine. Sometimes you're living high on the hog, and other times you are eating Ritz crackers and eating out of cans of tuna. A lot of times it's freelance work. You don't know when your next paycheck is gonna come, and sometimes you will go a whole year without a job, and you are fighting to make ends meet and stretching $10,000 to last over the course of 6 months to a year. So freezing your eggs was a luxury. And now what we know about egg freezing is that it's not a guarantee that any one of them is going to be viable, or that even when they're implanted in your uterus, that they're going to, that it's going to take. So it really is a crapshoot. And it's also an extraordinarily painful process. When I said that God is not a woman, I mean it, because there is no way that a woman would put us through everything that we have to go through just to manifest our so-called fairy tales, or our fairy tale ending. The choices that I ended up not making, pursuit of marriage and kids and this and that sort of thing, it wouldn't have cost me anything by way of uh, disapproval of family. My mother was raised Catholic. She was a day girl in a convent. Her parents were from the Eastern European bloc. She lived in Europe until she was 15 years old when her family immigrated to Canada. And her mother died shortly after they had immigrated. My mother was 15, almost 16 years old. And my mother ended up meeting my godmother in the same high school, in the same grade as I met my best friend, but 30 years apart, which is so cute and so funny. And when they met, they're both from the old country and they'd both been raised Catholic. They both said to each other, let's make a pact. If we ever have female children, we're not going to raise them Catholic. There's something about Catholicism that makes women feel like they're second class citizens, like they are there for that marriage is a sacrament and it's a holy sacrament and you are there to obey your husband without any consideration as to what you may need, what you may feel, what you may want. And they had seen their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunts live lives that did not belong to them, and they decided that that was not the lives that they were going to give their female children. So my mother had me, and my godmother Renata had a daughter named Laura, and we were not raised religious at all. To the point where I literally told my mom, I was like, can I go to Catholic school? She was like, no. I really just wanted to go because I liked the uniforms and I didn't want to look for something to wear every single day. But my mother was steadfast that no, any curiosity that you have with religion, you can go and seek that out on your own. But I'm not going to hold you to, an indoctrination that doesn't really belong to you. You make your own choices. And so when it came to checking boxes, my mom had already decided what my daughter's life is for her to live. And I'm lucky in that way. Very, very lucky in that way. My mom gave me suggestions and she made observations, but they were always so subtle. And she always knew that I was going to do whatever I wanted to do, however I wanted to do it. And that was the end of the story. I was a very strong-willed child, strong-willed teenager, strong-willed young lady, strong-willed adult woman. So I was never subject to those checked boxes, but I found myself in conversation over the years with many, many women that felt that pressure. And when it comes to those checked boxes, as it relates to marriage, I'm not sure if the vast majority of us go looking for these as factors in why we choose somebody. I think a lot of the times, as long as he's a good provider, that's the biggest check mark. Does he look good? Is he presentable? Do we have some things in common? Does he plan on being a good provider? Do we both want kids? Do we both want to get married? These are the things that people ask themselves, and this is what helps them make their decision. But they find out years into the marriage that it takes so much more to make a marriage successful than just those things. One of the main things that I think is missing from a lot of people deciding on getting married is how much of a friendship have you built with this person? Because like outlasts love 1,000% of the time. Through the course of my career and just life in general, I have spoken to so many successfully married couples. And success means that they still like each other decades later. That's success. They still wake up and want to participate in this partnership. That is success. And that's what they say, that like is more substantial than love. And looking back on my relationships, I realized that I that like was not high on my list of priorities. And that's probably the reason for failures. So before I sign off, I saw something on Instagram that I wanted to read today. It says, marriage is the lowest paid form of sex work. Women are owed reparations. The people we lay with are the people who are most likely to kill us, which sounds really dark, but that's the reality we're living in. The reality is women have lost their lives in pursuit of men. Women have lost their futures in pursuit of love. I think we all need to really sit down and ask ourselves as individuals, what does love actually mean for me? And what in my life resembles that? Does the man that I've chosen resemble that love that I want and deserve? The traditional idea of love is damaging for women because it involves us being self-sacrificial in order to prove our worth. Men need to learn to find sustenance, entertainment, and sexual gratification outside of women because we don't owe men that. We live in a society where men assign women humanity and worth based on how attractive they are to them. Men need to learn to find sustenance, entertainment, and sexual gratification outside of women because we don't owe men that deserved a repeat. Thank you so much for joining me on this very personal episode. But what I want to leave you guys with is I want every woman listening to this to understand that you have and you should exercise all of your choices. The way that things are going, Roe v. Wade being overturned, it is an act of defiance to embrace your individualism, to embrace your own identity, to embrace your wants, your hopes, your dreams, to embrace the way that you see your life going, how you see fit. It is your life to decide what happens in it. If you want to get out of bed and you want to make a million things happen in the course of the day, or if you want to be lazy and do absolutely nothing, everything is your choice. And in addition to that, there's a phrase that I heard recently that I absolutely love. And for any man listening to this, I do not say this to be offensive in any type of way. As a matter of fact, take yourself out of the equation because you're really not a part of it. And that is said with love. The phrase is decentering. Women have been conditioned to feel like men are the centerpiece of our lives, and everything else takes place on the peripheral. Our careers, our friendships, our social circles, our school, everything that we do is peripheral to centering a man, finding a man claiming us, a man being our husband, a man. When in actuality, it's you. It's about you and it's about your choice. If you never end up finding the quote unquote one, guess what? There's so much more that life has to offer you that will make it okay. Love is wonderful. Finding a relationship is wonderful, but not at the expense of yourself. And that's just my little bit of lived wisdom and experience. These are the things that I've learned, and I hope that what I've shared with you today you find useful in any way, shape, or form. Maybe you don't want to be anything like me, and that's completely okay. But hopefully some of the stories that I've told you today resonated with you in some way where you felt seen, heard, understood, but at the very least, entertained. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody, on Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. See you soon. Thank you for tuning into Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. Please rate, subscribe, and comment, and share wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Now, it seems like you've had access to high-value men or even high-earning men.
First of all, what do you all think that a high-value man is? I mean, I know we all know what Kevin Samuels said a high-value man is. But what actually is a high-value man? Is it a man with, a high earning potential, or somebody who's already realized that potential and he is a high earner? Is that what makes him a high value man? By way of my experiences, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I've coined a phrase. I call it rich man syndrome. And so basically, this is the way it goes. Rich man drops something on the floor, looks at it and says, somebody got to get that. That's rich man syndrome. Rich man syndrome is I walk through the world like there's a wake in front of me, and there's an assumption that everybody is just going to move out of my way, and I'm going to be able to get whatever I want. I can have whatever I want, even if it's at the expense of whomever, whatever. It doesn't matter. That is rich man syndrome. I can buy a solution to all of my problems, and whatever your issues are, they are inconsequential to me. So that's a general statement. Let me just not say that every man of high net worth is like that. But let's just there's a lot of similarities after you've dated one after the other, after the other, after the other. So a high value man to me at my age, it's a man that the minute that he saw my little girl Daisy, instantly runs to pick her up and smothers her with kisses. What does that tell me? That tells me that you have a love and a sense of compassion for all living things. That's what that tells me. A high value man to me is somebody who understands that vulnerability equals strength. A high value man to me is somebody who seeks self-awareness, and he finds it through meditation, prayer, therapy, quietness, solitude, reading, literature, intellectual curiosity. That is the sign of a high value man to me. Another sign of a high value man is one who does not believe that he has all the answers or knows everything, who can actually say the words, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. That's a high value man to me. A high value man is a man that has strong convictions, but is willing to say, I'm willing to be proven wrong. These are the signs of a high value man to me. A high value man loves and honors his mother and sees value in women past what they can do for him or how they can satisfy him. That is a high value man to me. And it took me a very long time to understand this. Be sure to follow Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford on IG at Hot and Bothered Podcast.